I had no father. I am like no father.
Star Wars lied to you. Not about the Force or the Jedi or any of that. It lied about what space actually feels like. Because while George Lucas was building toy-friendly empires and making sure every explosion came with a PG safety net, other filmmakers were out there crafting visions of the cosmos so raw, so unflinching, and so aggressively adult that going back to lightsaber duels almost feels like switching from whiskey to apple juice. And here's the thing. This isn't about hating Star Wars. Star Wars is comfort food, and comfort food is fine. But every now and then you need a meal that bites back. This is 15 R-rated space movies that make Star Wars feel guilty. And at least 2 on this list are so brutally brilliant that once you watch them, you will never look at space sci-fi the same way again. Number 15. Galaxy of Terror, 1981. In 1981, Roger Corman spent what most sources estimate at somewhere under $1 million.
It's been waiting 1 billion years to scare you
to make a movie that would accidentally reshape the entire future of science fiction filmmaking. Galaxy of Terror was supposed to be a quick and dirty Alien knockoff, and honestly, that is exactly what it was. But buried inside this scrappy little horror film was a secret weapon that nobody saw coming. A 26-year-old production designer named James Cameron. Cameron had just come off Corman's Battle Beyond the Stars the year before. The kid was hungry, and what he built on that shoestring budget was borderline miraculous. The production budget was roughly $700,000. On set, the interior walls of the spaceship were constructed out of spray-painted McDonald's takeout containers. Polystyrene burger boxes, scrap metal, and junk electronics were glued, bolted, and painted into corridors that looked like they cost 10 times what they actually did. Among the painters slapping color onto those fast food walls was a young set dresser named Bill Paxton, years before he would become an action movie star. When a scene called for maggots crawling on a severed arm, Cameron rigged a metal plate with an electrical current that made the worms writhe on command. That kind of resourcefulness is what made Corman love him, and it is what eventually led Cameron to the director's chair on The Terminator. Galaxy of Terror opened and earned roughly $4 million at the box office, a solid return on its tiny investment. Number 14. Screamers, 1995. The screenplay for Screamers was written in the early 1980s. The movie did not come out until 1995. That is not a typo. Dan O'Bannon adapted Philip K. Dick's 1953 short story Second Variety into a script around 1981. In fact, by 1983, the Screamers screenplay had been optioned by Tom Nowd. But nothing happened. The project bounced around Hollywood for over a decade, passed between producers, reworked, shelved, and nearly forgotten. When it finally went into production in the mid-1990s, the screenplay had been rewritten by Miguel Tejada Flores. The production budget was $14 million, and here is the part that still stings. O'Bannon himself had no idea the film had even been made until after it was released, when his agent called to let him know he had a screenwriting credit on a movie he never knew was being shot. They had kept his plot and characters, but rewritten most of his dialogue without ever contacting him. When Screamers opened, it earned just $5.7 million domestically and roughly $7 million worldwide. Columbia Pictures buried it with a January 1996 release date. Number 13. Life Force, 1985. In 1983, producers Menahem Golan and Yoram Globus signed Tobe Hooper to a 3-picture deal after the massive commercial success of Poltergeist. Life Force was the first film under that contract, and Cannon poured $25 million into it. To put that number in perspective, Back to the Future, the biggest hit of 1985, cost roughly $19 million. On set, the pedigree behind the camera was staggering. Dan O'Bannon co-wrote the screenplay. Alan Hume handled the photography. John Dykstra supervised the effects. Henry Mancini wrote the score. The film follows astronauts who discover a 150-mile-long alien spacecraft hidden inside Halley's Comet. Inside, they find 3 humanoid creatures in suspended animation, including a female vampire played by French actress Mathilde May. May was barely 20 when the film was released. Behind the scenes, she had to learn her English lines phonetically because she barely spoke the language, and during her audition, she reportedly called her manager in a panic, convinced she was being cast in a pornographic film. She spent 6 months in London on the production and spent the vast majority of her screen time completely unclothed. When Life Force opened, the film grossed just $11.6 million domestically. Number 12. Pandorum, 2009. The script for Pandorum was originally written in the late 1990s, and it was never supposed to cost more than $200,000. Screenwriter Travis Malloy envisioned shooting the entire thing on video inside an abandoned paper mill with unknown actors and no studio involvement whatsoever. The story was set on a prison ship called Pandorum, carrying thousands of Earth's most dangerous criminals to another planet, with the cannibal hunters being the degenerated remains of those prisoners. Nobody in Hollywood was expected to touch it, but somehow the concept caught the attention of Paul W.S. Anderson and his Impact Pictures banner, and suddenly, that micro-budget concept was being reimagined as a $33 million production financed by Germany's Constantine Film. Filming took place at Studio Babelsberg in Potsdam from August through December of that year, where more than 90 craftsmen built 22 separate sets to create a spacecraft designed to house 60,000 passengers. The ambition was enormous. This was supposed to be the first installment of a trilogy. Then the box office happened. Overture Films released Pandorum on September 25, 2009, and it opened at number 6 with just $4.4 million. Worldwide, the film grossed just $20.6 million. The financial damage was so severe that it contributed to Overture Films declaring bankruptcy months later. Number 11. Outland, 1981. Peter Hyams wanted to make a Western. Every studio in Hollywood told him Westerns were dead. So he set his Western on Jupiter's moon Io, strapped a shotgun to Sean Connery, and made Outland instead. And here's the thing. Hyams was blunt about his intentions. He wanted to tell a story about Dodge City, about how hard and brutal frontier life actually was, but dressed in spacesuits and pressurized corridors instead of leather boots and saloon doors. The script was essentially High Noon, transplanted to a mining colony on the edge of the solar system. The budget started at roughly $12 million. And here's an interesting fact. Outland was the first motion picture ever to use introvision, a variation on front projection that allowed actors to walk convincingly through miniature environments by combining foreground, midground, and background elements directly in the camera. No blue screen, no optical compositing. Everything blended in a single shot. The results were so seamless that modern VFX artists have openly expressed disbelief at what the production achieved with 1980s technology. When Outland opened, the film earned roughly $20 million. Number 10. Pitch Black, 2000. Before Vin Diesel was driving cars through skyscrapers, he was stranded in the Australian desert wearing contact lenses that almost blinded him on the first day of shooting. Pitch Black was filmed in Coober Pedy, a remote opal mining town in South Australia, roughly 500 miles north of Adelaide. The town's population hovers around 2,000 people. The production budget was roughly $23 million. Behind the scenes, the creature designs were handled by Patrick Tatopoulos, who built the bioraptors to look like a nightmare version of a shark. And here is the detail that tells you everything about the scrappy spirit of this movie. Despite the film being set on a scorching alien world, Coober Pedy in the southern hemisphere's winter was actually around 10 degrees Celsius, barely 50 degrees Fahrenheit. On set, the actors had to be misted with water between takes to look like they were sweating. The signature contact lenses Diesel wore to create Riddick's surgically enhanced night vision were untested prototypes that had never been worn by anyone before. After the first day of filming, the crew could not get them out of his eyes. An optometrist had to be flown in from the nearest city, 3 hours away. Pitch Black opened and grossed over $53 million worldwide. Number 9. Total Recall, 1990. The script for Total Recall spent 16 years in development hell. 16. In fact, the project burned through roughly 40 drafts of the screenplay and cycled through at least 7 different directors. Richard Dreyfuss was attached to star at one point. Patrick Swayze was seriously considered. David Cronenberg spent a full year on the project and wrote 12 drafts of his own version. The production budget was roughly $65 million. During production, Dust inhalation and food poisoning swept through the cast and crew. It was so bad that Schwarzenegger had all his food shipped from the United States, having learned his lesson from Predator. And here's the thing. Throughout filming, Schwarzenegger secured veto power over the producer, the director, the screenplay, the co-stars, and the promotional campaign. His first move was personally recruiting Paul Verhoeven. On set, Verhoeven brought his entire RoboCop crew along for the ride, including actor Ronnie Cox, cinematographer Jost Vacano, and special effects designer Rob Bottin, who would use over 3,000 blood packs during filming. The hard work paid off. Total Recall opened at number 1 and earned $261 million worldwide. Number 8. Starship Troopers, 1997. Starship Troopers was never supposed to be a Heinlein adaptation. Screenwriter Edward Neumeier had been developing an original script called Bug Hunt at Outpost 9, a gory sci-fi action piece about soldiers fighting alien insects. When the producers realized the concept bore too many similarities to Robert Heinlein's classic 1959 military novel, they purchased the book rights, merged the two projects, and attached Paul Verhoeven to direct. The budget was $105 million. Behind the scenes, Verhoeven designed the entire film as what he called a fascist utopia. The casting was strategic. Casper Van Dien, Denise Richards, Dina Meyer, and Neil Patrick Harris were all relatively unproven. Nearly half of the $105 million budget went directly to visual effects. Phil Tippett and his studio created over 600 CGI shots, roughly 200 of which depicted the arachnid creature. Tippett's Berkeley-based studio effectively doubled in size to handle the workload, and the animators spent most of 1997 meticulously layering thousands of creatures into footage that had been shot on location in the Badlands of Hell's Half Acre in Wyoming and South Dakota. The summer temperatures on location hit 115 degrees. Actors filming in heavy armor suffered heat stroke at a rate of roughly 25 people per day. When Jake Busey collapsed from the heat, production shut down for an entire week. When Starship Troopers finally opened, it earned just $121 million worldwide. It was declared a commercial disappointment. Number 7. Alien Romulus, 2024. When Fede Alvarez pitched his Alien story, the plan was for it to go straight to Hulu. The pandemic had cratered theatrical confidence, streaming was king, and a new Alien film with 0 returning cast members seemed like exactly the kind of mid-budget genre project that belonged on a platform rather than a marquee. But then the tide shifted. Theatrical audiences came back. Disney, which now owned the franchise through the Fox acquisition, made the call to put Alien Romulus on the big screen. And here is the remarkable part. The budget never changed. The $80 million that had been greenlit for a streaming movie became the $80 million for a theatrical release, and Alvarez made every dollar count. During production, a working power plant outside Budapest was used for the mining colony exteriors, giving the oppressive corporate world of Weyland-Yutani a tangible industrial weight that no green screen could replicate. Alvarez was obsessive about practical effects. He insisted on building every creature and every set from scratch, refusing to use green screens entirely. Alien Romulus opened at number 1 with over $41 million domestically, and went on to gross roughly $351 million worldwide. Number 6. Sunshine, 2007. Danny Boyle made his cast live together in student dormitories before a single frame of this film was shot. He sent them up in planes so they could feel weightlessness in their bones. He hired a particle physicist from CERN named Brian Cox to serve as the film's scientific advisor, and had Cillian Murphy tour the facility in Switzerland, studying real physicists and copying their mannerisms to understand how someone who carries the fate of humanity in a nuclear equation would actually move through a room. That is the level of commitment behind Sunshine, a film that $40 million was poured into and that only $34.8 million came back from. But here's the thing. Writer Alex Garland originally conceived this project as a trilogy. In fact, he and Boyle spent an entire year developing the screenplay, producing roughly 35 drafts as they refined the balance between scientific rigor and psychological horror. Behind the scenes, the film was shot at 3 Mills Studios in East London, where roughly 80% of the ship's lighting came from practical fixtures built directly into the sets, rather than traditional film lighting rigs. Boyle deliberately cast the ensemble without major stars, so the audience would genuinely not know who would survive. That ensemble turned out to be one of the most stacked casts ever assembled for a box office failure. Number 5. Prometheus, 2012. Ridley Scott originally wanted $250 million and an R rating. Fox told him no. What he got instead was roughly $130 million, and he still got the R rating, which made Prometheus the most expensive R-rated science fiction film Fox had ever greenlit at that point. Behind the scenes, the journey to production was long and convoluted. 8 sound stages at Shepperton and Pinewood Studios in England housed 16 different sets. The production then moved to Iceland for 2 weeks to capture the film's haunting opening sequence at the Dettifoss waterfall and near the Hekla volcano, which was reportedly threatening to erupt while the crew was filming beside it. Additional exterior work was done at Wadi Rum in Jordan and on the Isle of Skye in Scotland. The entire film was shot in native 3D. Prometheus opened to $51 million domestically and earned $403 million worldwide, making it the highest-grossing film in the Alien franchise. Number 4. Saturn III, 1980. This is a movie that had everything. A visionary production designer with an Oscar-winning track record, a script by one of Britain's most celebrated young novelists, the star power of a Hollywood legend, and the most famous woman on the planet in the late 1970s. Yet, it collapsed so completely that it became a cautionary tale about how easily ambition can be undone by chaos, ego, and catastrophic bad luck. The concept originated with John Barry, the acclaimed production designer who had worked on A Clockwork Orange, Star Wars, and Superman. He imagined a claustrophobic Gothic thriller set on one of Saturn's moons, a small film about isolation, obsession, and a robot corrupted by its creator's madness. And here's the thing. Initially, producer Stanley Donen took the project on and hired a young Martin Amis to write the screenplay. The star power of Farrah Fawcett also pushed the budget to $10 million and transformed Barry's originally intimate vision into something far more grandiose. In fact, the studio had initially hoped for Sean Connery in the lead role. Then John Barry was fired. Harvey Keitel, miserable throughout production, refused to attend post-production. His entire performance was dubbed by British actor Roy Dotrice. Behind the scenes, the robot Hector, an 8-foot-tall, headless mechanical figure powered by fetal brain tissue and operated by a team of 20 crew members, cost over $1 million to build. Despite all these, Saturn III earned less than $5 million worldwide. Number 3. Aliens, 1986. When 20th Century Fox asked James Cameron to write a sequel to Alien without Sigourney Weaver, he refused. Fox had been dragging its feet on a contract with Weaver over a pay dispute, and rather than resolve it, the studio casually suggested Cameron just write Ripley out of the story entirely. Cameron told them no. He had started writing the script with the understanding that Weaver was attached, and he was not going to build a sequel to one of the greatest horror films ever made without its greatest character. Fox eventually caved. The production budget was $18.5 million. But here's the thing. From the first week, the production was in conflict. Cameron collided with a British crew who had union-mandated tea breaks, fixed working hours, and no awareness of who he was. On set, the crew staged what Gail Ann Hurd described as a pseudo-rebellion, and Cameron eventually fired the original director of photography. When Aliens opened, the film grossed over $131 million worldwide. Number 2. Event Horizon, 1997. The film that audiences finally have today is not the film Paul W.S. Anderson made. It is a shorter, less violent, structurally compromised version of a movie that was originally 130 minutes long, contained scenes graphic enough to make test audiences faint, and featured so much carnage involving scenes of cannibalism and extreme gore that Paramount reacted with something close to panic. Imagine what the full version felt like. The production budget was $60 million. And here's the thing, Anderson turned down the opportunity to direct X-Men and Alien Resurrection to make this film. After the commercial success of Mortal Kombat, Paramount gave him significant creative freedom during shooting. The problem was not the filming, it was the timing. James Cameron's Titanic was running catastrophically behind schedule, and Paramount, which had co-financed that production, suddenly needed another film to fill the gap in their release calendar. Event Horizon was pushed forward. Anderson was contractually entitled to 10 weeks of editing time through the Directors Guild. he was given 4. When the initial 130-minute assembly cut tested poorly, Paramount ordered Anderson to gut the film. Over 30 minutes were slashed, including the full uncut version of the infamous sequence showing the original Event Horizon crew destroying themselves in what the production team bluntly referred to as a blood orgy. Event Horizon opened and grossed just $42 million. Number 1. Alien, 1979. Ridley Scott was not the first choice to direct Alien. He was not the second choice. He was not even the third or fourth. He was the fifth. The producer's first pick was Robert Altman. By the time Scott got the job, the film had a screenplay originally titled Star Beast. The budget was roughly $11 million. Sigourney Weaver, who was virtually unknown in film at the time, was the last actor cast. Behind the scenes, producers Walter Hill and David Giler had decided early on that the lead survivor would be a woman, but were so impressed with Weaver's audition that they built the role around her. The alien suit itself was constructed in roughly 10 to 15 separate pieces, worn over a black bodysuit by Balaji Badejo. The suit was so difficult to wear that Badejo could barely sit down between takes and could see almost nothing while inside it. The chestburster scene was famously shot with the cast largely unaware of how graphic it would be. Real animal organs were used. The reactions of genuine shock and horror on the actors' faces were not performances. Alien opened and earned over $100 million worldwide. If you made it this far, you already know which kind of space movie you prefer. And if any of these titles are new to you, your watch list just got a whole lot darker. See you in the next one.